I'm Corey Proffitt-Boyd, and this is Say It Anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway.
Welcome back to Say It Anyway. I'm Corey Proffitt-Boyd, and today I want to talk about something that almost all of us have experienced, whether we realized it at the time or not. Have you ever walked away from a conversation with someone you genuinely care about and still feel like they never really heard you? They weren't distracted by their phone, they weren't looking around the room, and they weren't being intentionally rude. They listened to every word you said, yet somehow you left feeling as though your thoughts never quite landed. I don't think that's because people have stopped caring about each other. If anything, I think most of us care deeply. The problem is that somewhere along the way, we've started confusing listening with waiting. We hear the first few sentences, our minds immediately begin making connections, and before the other person is finished, we've already started writing our response in our mind. It's such an automatic habit that we rarely notice ourselves even doing it. As someone is sharing a difficult day, we're already remembering one of our own. When they tell us about a challenge they're facing, we immediately begin searching for advice that might help them. We aren't trying to make the conversation about ourselves. We're trying to contribute, trying to be helpful. We're trying to show them we understand. The irony is that our desire to connect can sometimes keep the other person from feeling connected at all. I've caught myself doing this more times than I can count. I'll be listening with every intention of being present, and then suddenly I realized I've missed the last 20 seconds because I've been rehearsing what I want to say next. I wasn't listening anymore. I was simply waiting for my turn. I imagine most of us have been on both sides of that conversation. We've been the person trying to explain something that really mattered, only to watch the conversation slowly drift in another direction. And we've also been the person who sincerely believed we were helping, never realizing we had accidentally interrupted something that still needed to be said. That realization has made me wonder whether one of the greatest gifts we can give another person isn't our advice, our experience, or even our opinion. Just maybe our attention. When you stop and think about it, that's becoming surprisingly rare. But why do we feel such an intense need to respond? I don't believe most people interrupt because they're selfish. In fact, I think the opposite is usually true. Most of us are searching for common ground. When someone tells us they're hurting, we instinctively reach into our own lives looking for a similar experience because we want them to know they're not alone. We think empathy sounds like, "I know exactly how you feel." But the more I think about it, the more I wonder if empathy sometimes sounds much quieter than that. Maybe empathy begins by allowing someone to finish before we decide what their story means to us. I've noticed that the people who have made me feel the safest over the years weren't necessarily the ones who gave the best advice. They were the people who never made me feel rushed. There was something incredibly comforting about talking to someone who wasn't constantly looking for the next opening to speak. I can literally remember feeling them giving me permission to take my time, gather my thoughts, and say what I really meant instead of what would fit neatly into their conversation. Looking back, I honestly remember very little of the advice those people gave me. What I remember is how they made me feel. I remember feeling lighter after I talked with them, and I remember leaving those conversations with the sense that someone had truly seen me, not because they solved my problems, but because they cared enough to stay present while I explained them. Isn't it interesting how we remember that? Years later, we may not remember a single sentence someone said, but we'll never forget how it felt to have their full attention. We're surrounded by more ways to communicate than any generation before us. Yet, despite all that communication, so many people still describe themselves as lonely. Maybe loneliness isn't always about being alone. Maybe sometimes it's about feeling unheard. Maybe that's why a 30-minute conversation with someone who truly listens can mean more than hundreds of quick interactions throughout the week. It reminds us that we're more than something to respond to. We're someone worth listening to. Let's take a quick break to hear from one of today's sponsors, and when we come back, I want to talk about what happens when we become the person who makes other people feel heard, and why that simple change has the power to strengthen marriages, friendships, families, and even conversations with complete strangers. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Before the break, we talked about how easy it is to confuse listening with simply waiting for our turn to speak. The more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that the people who have the greatest impact on my life weren't always the funniest, the smartest, or the ones with the perfect advice. They were the people who made me feel like I mattered while I was talking. That's a much bigger gift than we often realize. If you've ever lost someone you loved, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. When we miss people, we usually think about the conversations we wish we could have one more time. We replay moments in our minds, and what stands out isn't always the words they used. It's the feeling of being accepted. It's remembering that they let us be ourselves without rushing us or correcting us or making us feel like we had to earn their attention. Those are the conversations that stay with us. I think that's because being heard is one of the ways we experience love. Not romantic love necessarily, but human love. The kind that says, "You don't have to hurry, I'm here." And unfortunately, that really is becoming rare. Life keeps getting louder. Everyone's juggling responsibilities and deadlines and thousands of things competing for their attention. It's understandable that our minds wander. Mine certainly does. But I've started asking myself a simple question whenever somebody's talking to me. Am I listening because I want to understand? Or am I listening because I'm waiting for my opportunity to respond? Just asking that question changes everything where awareness is concerned. It slows me down. It reminds me that I don't have to contribute every thought that pops into my head, and I don't have to prove I understand by immediately telling my own story. Sometimes understanding isn't something we say. Sometimes it's something we demonstrate through our attention. And strangely enough, those moments of quiet often become the most meaningful part of the conversation. Here's something I've been trying lately, and I have to admit, it's harder than it sounds. The next time someone's talking to you about something important, resist the urge to think about what you're going to say next. Just listen. Don't try to find an answer or fix anything or relate it back to your own life. Just listen until they're completely finished. You might be surprised by what happens. People will often keep talking. After that first pause, they remember something they forgot to mention earlier, and they finally get to the part they've been trying to say all along. Sometimes they even answer their own question, simply because someone gave them enough room to think out loud. That's something we don't talk about very often. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes silence is where honesty shows up. We spend so much of our lives trying to become better communicators, but maybe becoming a better communicator has less to do with speaking beautifully and more to do with making someone else feel safe enough to speak honestly. Imagine what our human relationships would look like if more people felt that way. Imagine conversations where nobody was trying to win or have the funniest story or the perfect comeback. Just two people trying to understand each other. Although it sounds very simple, I think it could be life-changing, because every person we meet is carrying something we know nothing about. Sometimes they're carrying joy they can't wait to share, or heartbreak they haven't told anyone. Sometimes they're carrying fear behind a smile that's convincing everyone else that they're fine. We never really know, and that's why listening matters. Not because every conversation is life-changing, but because one of them might be, and you never know which one it is. Maybe the person sitting across from you doesn't need brilliant advice today. Maybe they don't need you to fix anything. Maybe what they need is the reassurance that for the next few minutes, they don't have to compete with your phone or your thoughts or your schedule or your next story. They just get you, and maybe that's what all of us are hoping for. Not someone with all the answers, just someone willing to stay long enough to hear the whole question. If this episode made you think about someone who has given you that gift, or maybe someone who could use it from you, I hope you'll carry that throughout the week with you. The next conversation you have could be life-changing, or it could be the conversation someone remembers for the rest of their life. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to follow the show, leave a review, and share it with someone who always makes you feel heard. I always look forward to our time together, and until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and say it anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd.